Hey, it's Debbie Potts, and I have another guest that I met when I was in Kona for Ironman Hawaii this year. And I went to Hawaii Ironman with the intention of observing how athletes were fueling, training the week before the race, how they're pacing themselves. And on race day, how were they fueling? How were they pacing themselves in the race so they could go the full distance and feel great, ideally, until you hit the finish line? Then how do they recover? So funny, I seeing this company and I heard about it online and I've gotten emails, received emails from FUELIN. So we are going to talk to Scott Tindal of FUELIN. I saw them in front of the old location for Lava Java used to be, and they were set up there on the race course on Alihi Drive. And I really thought what they're doing is pretty interesting, as I'm all about personalizing what you do, how you fuel, how you train, how you pace yourself in life in general, and working on nutrition. So we'll talk about how their program works, how they can help people with their performance gains. And as I'm talking about all the time, not just for racing, but what if you're like me and you're not racing anymore? You're just training because you love training and you want to thrive as you age and not struggle. Well, I am racing. I decided the race is of life, the endurance event called life. So I'm trying to go all the way to 100, baby. So if you are racing life, but not racing life too quickly, you're enjoying the journey like me, let's hear how we should fuel, train, to perform to be our best self. All right, let's bring on Scott. All right, guys, I have the man on the show to talk about how we can improve how we fuel, how we perform, how do we recover from workouts, because that's what I'm about on the show as we're all getting older, how to improve performance in life for today, but also as your future self. So we're doing all the right things now, not wait until you're broken, burned out, and shuffling around, falling over. You're 80 years old. So I have Scott on the show. You guys were all over Ironman Hawaii, Kona. I was standing in front of your booth a lot during race day and saw you guys, your unicorns. I got some good footage on my Instagram of you guys too.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Real pleasure to be on your show today, and I'm looking forward to just talking about, I guess, health first and foremost, and then how nutrition can impact that, but also can impact performance.
So first of all, I would like to ask everyone, what is your why? What's your passion, your purpose, your mission?
Well, I guess my why's changed a fair bit. It's changed since having a couple of young whippersnapper little children. So I guess my why is very much centered around my partner, Melissa, and Jack and Isabel. And I
Hmm.
guess I'm now nearing 50, so I'm much more cognizant about what I do with my body in terms of what I put into it and what I'm doing in terms of output. So I think I like to keep it pretty simple in terms of that why.
Hmm.
You know, that why is just obviously being not just living longer, but living, I think, a healthier life. And I don't want to be someone stuck in a nursing home. Unfortunately, I got to see my grandma, who I was very close to, at the end of her life, a very strong, powerful woman, sort of restricted to a nursing home in her last few years. And it's not really how I see myself finishing. I want to sort of, be able to do things right up until the end, and then hopefully just thanks very much, I'm out of here sort of scenario. So that's my why, and that's my how, I guess, that I plan on doing that.
Yeah, I know my listeners have heard 2 years ago, suddenly it's 2 years, my dad passed away. And I think once you start losing family members, it really brings awareness to what am I doing now to live my best life in the second half of my life? And I want to be thriving and not struggling. And now my mom suddenly is 83 and all of her friends that she's had for my whole life, you just watch people age and it kind of shifts your motivation and purpose to your workouts, I think, a little bit. Hopefully, it does that for people.
Definitely. I think both my parents are getting older now. Dad's nearly in his 80s and mum, high mid 70s. And I think that realization that Superman and Superwoman are maybe not invincible and
Yeah.
there will be an end point. So I think it's trying to maximize that time with them and hopefully them staying as fit and as healthy as possible as well. And they both are, thankfully. They've looked
Mm.
after
Lucky.
themselves and it makes a big difference in the way in which they're tackling sort of the last part. I guess
Yeah.
the
Less.
last quartile or however you want to
Mhm.
think about it.
Oh,
But
no.
it's sort of something to think about that we as human beings aren't very good at looking in that sort of linear direction. Even though we know it's coming, we're not very good at foresight. I think there is some neuropsychology around that and how the brain is actually wired, which is why people continue to if you talk about smoking, why people still smoke even though they know that it's bad for them, or
Mm-hmm.
overeat. We know that overeating is bad for us in terms of becoming obese or overweight, but it still happens. So
Hmm.
the brain is a an interesting creature within itself.
Yeah, I just finished earlier this year a 6-month course on precision medicine, but it was on behavior change and get board certified as health and wellness coach. But it was pretty fascinating about, which I've read the book before, motivational interviewing, and how it's not that people aren't aware that cigarettes are bad for them or eating, fried food and a shake and just a bunch of crap is they know it's not good for them, but how to change people's behavior of why do you do that and then guide them to figure out alternative food options or whatnot, or how their relationship with food and is so different. And just we
Yeah, I
know
think
that.
it's always like, again, that relationship with food and, even the notion of good or bad. It's
Hmm.
something we tend to really try and avoid at Fuel In because there aren't really any good or bad foods. It's sort
Hmm.
of context specific. I mean, you could argue that, people will argue that sugar is bad, but if you actually take it in context of, say, an athlete, actually it's their best friend. And
Hmm.
so I think it's really being context specific around it and not labeling foods necessarily good, bad, or evil, which unfortunately I think we see a lot of that in social media. It's awareness of everything everything in context, probably most things in moderation, including moderation. I think
Yeah.
it's always important. I'm sure we'll dive into some of that too.
Yeah, for sure. What is a note on that? I had this podcast for 12 years. We started out with John Smith, who founded the show and asked me to be a host and co-host on Fit, Fat, Fast. So eat fat to get faster and to train as an endurance athlete. And then over years changed it. He left a year after that and left me the show. And I changed it to low carb athlete. And then I just changed the name this year just to my own name because I couldn't fit and healthy from this side. That was kind of boring. Just like, I'm just going to call it my name. Anyways, the I switched because low carb athlete, I mean, doesn't mean no carbs and it means strategic carbohydrates and it means eat real food. And so you can't really call any podcast and make it interesting sounding like just eat real food, nutrient dense, fuel
Well, I
yourself
mean,
properly.
well, exactly. It's one of the things I think we're not zealots at Fuel In, I think, and uh, does that make it unsexy? I think is it's
Yeah.
always the difficult thing when you don't have, you're not necessarily going about it in, okay, this is the only way, it's black or white. And,
Yes.
the world of nutrition, it's not black or white. It's
Hmm.
individualized, it's context specific. And so you're right. Lower carb, there are times when we will recommend lower carbohydrate. Now, we won't go low carb under the strict scientific definition of less than
Yeah.
50 grams of
50.
carbs,
Hmm.
but lower carbohydrate is certainly something that some athletes will benefit from, depending on their individual situation. So that might be because we're trying to reduce total caloric intake. And in doing so, we might reduce total carbohydrate intake because that's a simple way of reducing total calories. On the
Hmm.
flip side, we might have athletes taking in large amounts of carbohydrates because A, the intensity of their training requires it, and also B, their total calorie requirement is actually super high. So we have to bump up carbohydrates. We're probably also bumping up fat just to meet their energy needs. So I
Hmm.
think It's always interesting, and it's interesting to hear your perspective that you changed your name of your podcast purposely because it's probably recognition as the scientific knowledge and scientific database grows that actually it's probably not about one way or the other. It's being smart
When?
about how you prioritize fuel based
Yeah.
again on the intensity, the duration, and the purpose of the athlete. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to reinforce that's what we're very much about at Fuel In is like fuel your purpose. Whatever that purpose can be, you can
Mm-hmm.
use nutrition to really emphasize that and optimize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's back up. I open up the website, people up to the video. Just overall, what is Fuelin and what
Yeah,
did you create it
so
for?
Fuel In is an iOS-based app. We will be releasing the Android app shortly, much to the delight of many of the Android users.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an AI-based nutrition program. It is created by humans, but there is obviously AI component to it and an algorithm component to it. The beauty of what we have created, and we were the world's first at doing this, was syncing directly with an athlete's training program. So initially, 3 years ago, we synced directly with Training Peaks. We were the first to do this, and as a
Mm-hmm.
result, athletes now had an unprecedented ability to look at their training program and their specific nutrition program and how it related to them. So no more PDFs where it was that theoretical, okay, you need to be thinking about taking in this amount of protein or this amount of carbohydrates in relation to your training. We're now telling you specifically, this is what you need to eat before, this is what you need to eat during, and this is what you need to eat afterwards in order to maximize your purpose. And for many athletes, this was a real game changer. Since that initial integration with Training Peaks, we've expanded. We now integrate with TriDot, with RunDot, with Final Surge, and just as of today, the integration with Humango has come through, which is really, really great. So we're really proud and pleased of these integrations and these partners that we hold. Um, it is very much personalized nutrition. We're very big on that. It's a focus
Mm-hmm.
on health and performance, and it is very much specific to the individual athlete.
Hmm. Okay. So what's your background in nutrition? Talk about kind of your role in this and how you
Yes, I'm
figure out this.
co-founder.
Mhm.
I'm co-founder of Fuel In. My background, I studied physiotherapy at the University of Sydney and achieved my Bachelor's of Science physiotherapy. I then went to the University of London, Queen Mary, and studied sports exercise medicine. I did my master's in that and graduated with distinction. And then after that, I did postgraduate studies uh, in performance nutrition through the ISSN and the IOPN at Westminster Uni. Um, so it's
Ongoing,
been, what's that?
ongoing education for sure.
Ongoing, and I think even beyond that, I guess some of the best education I've got is in the field. I have been extremely fortunate in my career to work with some of the best sporting teams in the world. So I started with Leicester Tigers rugby, who is a national team in the UK. I worked with the Tongan rugby team in their European leg their tour. I worked with England cricket with their A team, British rowing with the women's lightweight and heavyweight rowers, the Paralympics with the blind wrestlers. I then worked as the team nutritionist and head physiotherapist for Oracle Team USA in the America's Cup, where we were based in Bermuda for 3 years. And then my last team role was with the Toronto Maple Leafs in the NHL, based in Toronto in
So
the
you've
ice
lived
hockey.
all these
And
places?
yeah, I've lived all around the world. I lived overseas for the better part of nearly 20 years, and the last 7 years I've spent focused on Ironman. I was an advisor to Ironman as a nutrition expert, and have worked with professional and age group athletes since that time, including I'm sure you'll recognize some of the names: Holly Lawrence, Jan Frodeno. Kyle Smith, Imogen Simmons, Sky Munch, Justin Reel. There's a number of athletes that I currently work with or have worked with in the past that have also helped to shape Fuel In. A
Hmm.
lot of those athletes, and I sorry, I'm missing the most important athlete that was the first athlete I started with, which was Sarah Piano. And I was connected with through Matt Dixon, who's an
Hmm.
Ironman master coach and coach of Purple Patch Fitness in San Fran, way back in 2000 and what was it, 2017. Sarah and I
Hmm.
worked together, and she was a real integral part of creating this system. And I actually just recorded a podcast with her on our own podcast, Fuel In Sessions. I'll give it a little plug. That's released this week. And anyone who's interested in sort of the real deep dive into the background of Fuel In should certainly listen to that episode.
That's amazing. So to get started on this, how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, it's straightforward. Probably the hardest
Mm.
thing about all these apps is connecting them and getting started. That probably is the
Yeah,
thing that we're working on
with the
consistently.
app.
So
Yeah.
it's a, yeah, it's a case of actually going to the website. You sign up through the website first and foremost. So go to the
Hmm.
website, you select what program you want. We have three tiers. There's one called Autopilot, where you get the program, which is synced to your training program. I will also say that you don't have to have a training program. You can
Mm.
create your own training calendar directly in FuelIn. So if you're one of those athletes who uses Google Sheets or something like Excel or something like that and does it all
Still.
themselves, you
Yeah.
can just plan out your training calendar directly in FuelIn. So
Mm.
once you've connected, either set out your training program within Fuel In, and you've obviously selected your tier. So Autopilot being the program, Copilot gives you 24/7 access to coaches like myself, Megan Foley, Alan McCubbin, or one-to-one where we might, if you want the one-to-one coaching experience, you get like weekly video calls and very much a curated service in that. But
Hmm.
everyone gets the same quality of program, which is personalized to your training. You select what program you want, and then you select how long you want to do that for, either a month, quarterly, or annual. So it's that simple. Once you download it, once you've obviously paid, it's not a free app at this point in time. Once you have paid, you'll be asked to then download the app. You download the app, and then it walks you through very simply connecting. If you do use Training Peaks, Try Dot, Run Dot, Final Surge, or Humango, connecting those. If you want to create your own training calendar within FuelN, you do it that way. You connect Apple Health, and away you go. It's pretty simple.
Wow, that's amazing technology these days from when I started coaching people 25 years ago. Wow, look at this
Yeah,
now. It's
look,
so cool.
I mean, but honestly, like Debbie, I mean, I can tell you now that I was using Google Sheets. I mean, yeah, up until what we launched the iOS app in late 2000, let's call it, the start of 2022. But up until that time, it used to take me hours to do each program, and I'd always have to do it on a Sunday because
Mm.
that's when the coach would deliver the training program. So
Yeah, people want to know.
my Sundays were constantly taken up, and it'd take a couple of hours to do a training program. Now, I
Hmm.
mean, because the principles and the rules and everything we've created are there, we can create a training program in literally a matter of seconds. So it is exceptional. It's not replacing humans. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really important point. We have a really strong team behind us. And we know that nutrition is so personal that for many individuals, they may use autopilot, but they'll book a consultation with Alan, with Megan, or myself because they want to talk about what they're eating. And I
Hmm.
think that's a really important point. And the program will get better and better as we build it out, not just telling people how much to eat, but also the quality of what you're eating.
Yeah.
For the time being, you know, a human and a nutrition expert is someone who is going to coach you. So I think it allows the coach to coach. Writing a
Hmm.
macro plan, great. Probably
Yeah.
a lot of people can do it. Can they do it specifically based around training? No, not that many practitioners are very good at that.
Hmm.
But even those ones who can do that, great. You're writing. macronutrients and amounts of carbohydrates and protein and fat. That's important, super important. But coaching, if you come down to that, coaching is talking to a human being
Yeah.
and working through that. Not everyone needs it. Some people, I mean, look, of the, thousand, what have we got? Just over, 1,800 athletes on the program monthly. Of those, how many of them talk to someone face to face like me and you are doing now? Probably a very small proportion. A
Wow.
lot of them will chat within because they're on Copilot and ask questions, and a good majority will just crack on with the program and do it. But I think the point being is if you have issues, talking to a human being about what you're trying to resolve in combination with the program, it accelerates the learning process and certainly accelerates the results.
Hmm. That's what Dirk Friel and I were talking about yesterday on Training Peaks. The same thing. And when I talked to TriDot and talk to those guys, it's like AI can't take over everything. You still need to personalize things and get the human touch and course correct and use intuition and using all these metrics we keep talking about, the aura and the whoop. None of it's accurate. So we still need to go combine that with the own client's intuition and figure out what are they feeling? How are you? How's your energy? How's your mood? And what's going on in your life? And how did your gut feel bloated? Were you constipated? You got to talk about all that stuff to figure out what works best for you, not just rely on something that is correlated with your workouts that you completed and your heart rate variability.
No, correct. And every day, and we're big proponents of that. So I know working in professional sport with professional athletes, we investigated the use of a lot of trackers. The reality
Mm,
is, and even when you look at the research, the subjective rating that an athlete provides is as reliable and probably more valid to assessing the readiness of an athlete. So every day we ask the athlete, how's your energy? How's your mood? How's your energy? How's your muscle soreness? How was your
mhm.
sleep last night? Are you sick? And are you injured? So
Yeah.
that gets asked every day, and that's really important for the individual to assess how they're doing on a daily
Hmm.
basis. And that's really important as well, empowering the athlete to say, actually, I am good. I'm a 3 or I'm a 4 every day,
Hmm.
or actually, I'm going down to a 2 or a 1. Maybe things aren't going well. Maybe I am under fueling. Maybe I am doing a little bit more. Maybe I'm not sleeping well enough. I need to either course correct and change that, or I need to speak to someone and get some help to see if I can, get some ideas around maybe I'm not eating enough and how do I actually incorporate food first and foremost into my life to hit the numbers that I'm getting told to do because I'm probably missing that, or is there anything else I can do, i.e., sleep hygiene, maybe some supplements that may be required, or supplemental foods that may be required, and any other techniques that may be
Hmm.
there that the coach can sort of recommend.
Now, personalization, I see the macros and the calories and your zones on the app when you correlate data from Training Peaks, combine it to fueling. What if you do, like I do metabolism testing, I use Pinoe metabolic testing cart, do the resting metabolic rate, figure out their calories and kind of figure out their macros from there. What if you do an exercise test and somebody gets their heart zones instead of doing a formula or field test? Can you add or adjust those numbers?
So currently, you can't input your specific RMR into there. It
Hmm.
is something that is coming in the next release of the algorithm. The app that you're viewing on the website at the moment is actually being replaced in about just over 20 days
Uh-huh.
with a very new looking, the UX and the UI is completely different. Well, not completely different, but certainly is going to look a lot cleaner, a lot more user friendly. And we've certainly updated the back end. Had a huge change to the back end, which is going to improve the way in which we can analyze the data, but also add in additional fields. So things like an athlete's FTP, their run speed, their critical swim speed, RMR, percentage of body fat, if it's known through DEXA, will all be able to be inputted, and that will
Okay.
make the output more accurate to the individual.
Yeah. I know it's amazing. I was going to add too. I did people's training programs and training peaks for years, and before that, like a Word document calendar. But it is hard to you can't charge as much the hours you spend writing a workout out. Same with what you're saying, nutrition program is. I stopped doing it as much because I'd spend hours, especially triathlon workout. So it's nice to see there's a little easier way to do things. A marathon program is a lot easier than doing a swim, bike, and run training schedule and then tie in their nutrition. It's really hard. You can't charge a $500,000 for all the time you put in if you value or go by how much hours you spend on that to make it customized. But that's so cool to do this.
Yeah, it's look, I mean, we're still by far the most expensive out of the nutrition apps that are available, but we believe we are a premium product and worth that price. And even when we
Yeah,
talk about it being expensive, I mean, you're talking on a monthly basis, I think $39. Um,
awesome.
like, yes, that's more expensive, but I always say to the athlete, like, they will spend thousands and thousands on wheels and carbon
I
bottle
know.
holders and things like that that might reduce the weight of the bike by,
Yeah.
20 grams. And I'm sort of like, have you ever thought about, looking at yourself and internally and saying, okay, how can you optimize your health and maybe your performance through
Not just the
focusing
bike.
on nutrition and not just the bike? The sad thing is, as I come back to, is the role of nutrition, and we're very big on this again, is that it's not a quick fix. We're not a fad diet. And coming back to what you
Yeah.
talked about, and whether you want to call like a low carb, high fat sort of, that was it a fad? Is it a fad? Whatnot? But we're not a fad diet. We're built around science. It's evidence informed. It's no bullshit. It's, this is what we know in the current science. Are we agreeable to adjusting the philosophy over time as more
Mm,
scientific evidence comes available? Absolutely. So we're not like this is the only way. This is
hmm
the way based on what the current research says. And I know we're going to talk about older individuals. What does the science say around things like protein? What does it say
Yeah.
around carbohydrates? What does it say around fat, calories, and so on?
hmm
Menopause. How is that
hmm
impacted by nutrition? Nutrition is a long game. And I think that's how, again, you come back to the why. The long game is living a healthier, better life. Nutrition is going to have a direct impact on that. And it's not going to be a 30-day nutrition program to reset and get ripped and all that rubbish. Like what you eat on a daily basis over days, weeks, months, years is going to be the thing that makes the difference. And so it's
Yes.
getting your head around that. How do you eat good quality protein? How do you eat a fair amount of protein? How do you eat good quality
Mm.
carbohydrates, good quality fats? How do you control the portions in relation to what you require? That's where nutrition makes a big difference.
Now, what if you did, like I do functional lab testing with people? Is probably in the future, do you see it being able to do a food elimination test if people are reactive to foods and you want to like get into like I can't do wheat, I can't do oats, or I can't do cow dairy? I mean, how technical can you make it?
Well, it can do that at the moment. So, again, if anyone's familiar with Sarah Piano, one of the things when I first started working with her, she suffered a lot from GI distress, bloating. She has
Mm,
Hashimoto's. So we went through, she had known FODMAP issues.
mm,
So for listeners out there, I'm sure you're familiar with
mhm.
FODMAPs, fermentable
Yep.
oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. They're types of carbohydrates that can cause issues. Now, where a lot of people get, um, you probably, they misunderstand, they might avoid carbohydrates because they think they're gluten intolerant, but it's actually just the FODMAPs and these
Yeah.
types of carbohydrates that are causing the issue. So, what we found with her is she had some known FODMAPs. She didn't have to exclude all carbohydrates. She didn't have to exclude. I would use Monash University if
Mm,
I was searching for FODMAPs. I think Monash University down in Melbourne is the leader in
mm,
FODMAP research. Their FODMAP app is world class and is a
I've heard that.
fantastic resource for anyone suffering from the potential for FODMAP sensitivity. So what I was getting at is that we used Fuel in its basic form and where it is now to help Sarah recover because we don't set out a structured diet plan. You're not told what to eat on Monday at breakfast in terms of you're told to eat a bowl of cereal, a bowl of oatmeal, for instance, Debbie. And on lunch, we're telling you to eat zucchini noodles with white fish, and dinner is a pork chop with some potatoes because that becomes restrictive for a user. It's
Hmm.
fantastic week one. Starts to wane a little bit week two. And by week three, you're like, I don't have that in the fridge. Oh, bugger it. I'm just going to
Yeah.
order Uber Eats. And I
Uh-huh.
think that's the problem with traditional nutrition. It's you have to fit it into you have to fit into it.
Mhm.
What our approach is Fuel In should be able to fit into your life
Yeah.
because it's not a rigid, structured program in that sense. You can track your food using what we call AI Scooter. So you can literally talk to Scooter and say, okay, I had 2 pieces of whole wheat toast, 2 eggs, a
Okay.
handful of arugula, and that will then log the macronutrients specific to the meal. You can see what we're
Mm.
being recommended in terms of protein, fat, carbohydrates, and calories. And what you're talking to Scooter with will then log that. And so whatever's in your fridge, you theoretically could use to hit the numbers that we're recommending for that meal and across the day.
Mm. Where did the word scooter come from?
It's actually one of my nicknames.
Scott Scooter. All right, now we
So
know.
And so, back to your point though, Debbie, if you were, say, you were coaching an athlete and they were using Fuel In and you said to them, hey, you're lactose intolerant, you can't eat lactose, that's fine. They just don't include any lactose containing foods when they're eating on a daily basis, but they're still eating and aiming towards the total calories, the
Mm.
total macronutrients that we're recommending. They're just excluding those dairy containing products.
Okay. And then when you're doing the nutrition, how do they figure out the macro ratios of when to add in more carbs, the carb strategic carb timing? And I see you have sweat and carb testing on here. How do you figure that out for people?
That's the IP. That's the genius behind it. So based on the purpose of the athlete, so if we want to keep it simple, if the athlete is trying
Mm.
to lose weight, then
It's more
they would
misled.
have to be pushed into a caloric deficit. Now that caloric deficit would be based on how aggressive they want to be. Are they doing it in standard, moderate, or aggressive? And that would be a determinant of reducing total calories across the day. Their total caloric requirements would be based on their body weight, their current body weight, what their goal weight is, their training load. So, what is the volume in terms of the duration? What are the intensities? And how does that compare from last week to the current week? So it goes through, and then based on what they're doing in terms of their individual days, again, in the screenshot that you're showing on screen, that's an hour and 15-minute run of high intensity. It's saying that it's zone 4. So there is going to be fuel recommended within that because of the duration and because of the intensity of that session. And that individual can take in quite a little bit of carbs. So between 60 and 80 grams of carbs per hour is being recommended. And that would be once the athlete has done 3 carbohydrate capacity tests, which is what we call just recording what you can consume in session, you will then be recommended personalized amounts based on what you're capable of doing.
Do you measure glucose levels at all? Can you add in your blood glucose if you do a CGM or just prick your finger?
We don't. I
There's no
tend
way
to
there.
probably discourage individuals, especially athletes, from wearing
Mm.
CGMs. I think it causes more anxiety than
It
its
does.
benefit.
Yeah.
So we tend not to do that. I think, again, if you look at CGM use, probably context specific, the
Mm.
population, overweight, obese individuals who have maybe insulin sensitivity issues and elevated HbA1c and whatnot, and sort of from a medicinal standpoint could be beneficial and certainly can be beneficial for those subpopulations. But I think for athletes, it's not something that we're too concerned about at this point in time.
Do you use blood chemistry panel or integrate that at all? As I was talking, I do that test, lab testing, as I said, but I talked to Rhythm at Ironman Expo. It'd be interesting to see you guys all have like integrations.
Yeah, we know the guys from Rhythm. We've spoken to some of the big carriers of blood testing as well. I think where we would use and integrate blood testing is show key results
Mm,
around known issues that would impact individuals who exercise. So things like HbA1c from a health perspective, certainly their full iron panel,
misled. Mm,
looking at ferritin, transferrin saturation, hemoglobin, to determine whether an athlete is iron deficient or iron deficient anemic. They're going to be important. B12 status, and then, looking at other straightforward things like complete blood count or full blood count, they could be inputted as well. And visually, that can be input quite easily. We're looking at how we visually make that appealing, but also relevant. I think
mm,
what we're really trying to do is keep things simple. And I think this is, again, in the world of nutrition, I think a lot of these data points can come in, but how meaningful are they to the individual, or do they just create confusion? So I think
for
even
sure.
with trackers, what objective data would be of interest? You know, total sleep time, maybe. Are we interested in the sleep stages? Maybe not. Maybe just get the individual focusing on total sleep time as a good starting point. Things like resting heart rate, probably a good indication of overall health. HRV, maybe, depending on the accuracy. Again, depends on the device that's pulling that data. So I think, again, the possibilities and on our roadmap within the product, certainly we're very interested in these wearables and the API to bring it in. What we're very cognizant of is not not creating information overload and still staying hyper focused on nutrition, which is ultimately getting the individual to focus on food first and foremost, but not food only. So
Hmm.
using supplemental sports formulated products when it's required. And certainly in-session fueling is a great example of that. The use of a protein powder, whether it be whey or plant-based, externally, if protein intake is something that an athlete's struggling with, we're certainly for that. You mentioned vitamin D, using vitamin D supplements, certainly over the winter months if the individual is found to be insufficient or deficient as well.
Yeah, I just had looked over someone's blood chemistry, which, by the way, blood chemistry makes no sense to people if they look at it. So I think it only works for a practitioner because I put it in and it will give me clues to if it's higher or lower than optimal, not the lab ranges. But vitamin D for someone who's 13 and we want it, most people want 60 to 80. So it's really important, I think, to get tested for vitamin D. So,
Yeah, I
other
mean
question.
Vitamin D status, especially, your northern hemisphere. I mean, we know from October through to probably April, the wavelength of the sun doesn't create vitamin D in the northern
Mm,
hemisphere. And if you're a dark-skinned individual, you're going to have even more difficulty creating vitamin D. So the black and the Hispanic populations, more often than not, are deficient in North America, and that's pretty well documented in population-based
mhm,
studies. So
mhm.
getting tested before winter comes is probably the most important perspective, from certainly from my perspective and the team's perspective, is like, when are you thinking about getting tested? Well, probably going into winter. So if you're
Mm.
already vitamin D deficient, you certainly don't want to go through all of winter and then get tested at the end and go, oh my God, I'm really deficient now. Like,
Yeah,
fortify
get ahead of it.
yourself, get ahead of it.
Yeah.
That's your baseline for off season in terms of that blood testing. And then, 6 months later, before the start of the full on season, okay, where are you at? Obviously, if there were certain markers that were deficient or insufficient and you apply an intervention, you would retest sooner. But then maybe 6 months later, April, you get tested. How's your vitamin D? How's, as you said, your CBC? Your iron panel. Everything looks great. Season's going to be wonderful. And you're just doing
Hmm.
that every 6 months as an athlete, I think, as a good starting point. Maybe every 12 months, depending on the individual.
Yeah, I think 6 months. So real quick, and then I want to get into the aging athlete. But the carbohydrates I found interesting at Ironman. There's a lot more people suggesting 100 to 120 grams. I've done Dan Plu's programs at Endure IQ, and he's about the 60 grams, but then everyone's now saying 100, 120 grams. So on here, how do you figure out how many carbs they should have per hour? Is that just adjusting it based on their experience?
Yeah, I think, look, I think this is the misconception at the moment. So, what the science says is that yes, we can go 120, 140, maybe even higher than that. We're certainly seeing that in the professional athletes that I work with and hearing stories of other athletes consuming very high amounts. What is forgotten here is that in a lot of these studies, they're either elite or trained athletes that have huge power numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And power numbers translate to energy expenditure. So their power is huge, their energy expenditure is huge, and their condition, i.e., their muscles, their mitochondria, and everything, are conditioned to these power outputs and probably the intake of high amounts of carbohydrates. What is missed in this whole translation of science is that the average person doesn't ride zone 2 in 320 watts and
Yep.
therefore
Gotcha.
does not require 120 grams an hour. If you are, and I'll keep this very basic and just split it into two things. If you are a female athlete and you're not pushing more than 160 watts for race pace for 2.5 hours or above, let's think 70.3 or Ironman, then you probably don't even need up to 90 grams an hour. Okay. Probably that sweet spot is going to be somewhere between 50 and 70 grams an hour to keep you fueled on the bike and allow you to have a great run off the bike. If you're a male athlete and you're not pushing more than 210, 220 watts, you're probably not going to need certainly no more than 90 grams an hour. If you're hitting above that number or at that number, 90 grams an hour should serve you well and potentially above that amount. But if you're below that number, again, somewhere probably around that 50 to 70 grams an hour is probably going to be suffice and make you feel really great, but not get you sick. And so
Yeah.
it's just this like, again, it's jumping on, oh my God, it's 120 grams an hour. Kyle Smith smashing 130 grams an hour. I've got to do that too. Oh, wait a minute. I don't push nearly half as much as the numbers as him. So why am I trying to consume the same amount? So
Yeah.
I'll just leave that. Like, that's very much how we're focused. And I think through repeated testing in training, again, one of the big proponents or the things that we push in FUELIN is practicing your fueling strategies for the appropriate sessions when required, because that is ultimately going to build out your race fuel strategy and your hydration strategy because you're practicing it in training. And
Mm.
that's often a light bulb moment for athletes where
Mm-hmm.
they're like, oh my God, I never thought that what I do in training is going to translate to a race. And you're like, how the hell do you not think about that? And then it's like, I just didn't think about it. I just thought I'd do my training and then turn up on the race and eat whatever's there. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, you
Buffet.
practice, you know, specific adaptation to implied demand, the said principle.
Yeah.
Practice what you want to achieve. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really important.
That's why we always would do B and C races or D races. We can practice strategies and races that you don't care about. They're
But
just
but
a test
even
session.
but even before getting to those races, if you've got a zone 3, brick,
Mm-hmm.
that's an
When you
opportunity to
use it.
practice your race fueling.
Yep.
What,
Yeah.
not just grams per hour, but what products are you going to consume? How much carbohydrate are you applying to your liquid source based on your sweat rate?
Mm.
Because you don't want to overconsume your fluids solely because that's where all your carbs are. If it's a cool weather race, you're going to have to eat some of your carbs so that you're not over consuming fluids or under consuming carbs because you're not actually drinking that amount of fluid. So
Mm-hmm.
what you practice and test in training, i.e., through sweat rate testing, which we do in the app, which you've got the screen there, or carb capacity testing, testing consistently what carbohydrates you're consuming and how much, you start to build this database and this library, this bank of data that is specific to you as an individual athlete. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, again, that's game changing for a lot of athletes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so you're not the one throwing up in the entire race or
Hopefully
known for
not.
throwing up.
Hopefully not. So.
So last bit, let's talk about, how this can help the aging athletes. We talked about men and women aging, but females are so much more anabolic resistance. We have insulin resistance because of lower hormones. Do you have any adjustments for females and males as we age? We need to look
Yeah,
at.
I've talked about this a lot. So I think, again, the misconception here, or historically, was that as an older individual, you didn't require as much protein, for instance. Let's focus on protein. Now, that was the misnomer. Older individuals, because they weren't doing as much, didn't need as much. What's caught up is actually the science to that and says actually older individuals need as much, maybe even a little bit more than their younger counterparts. And their younger counterpart, if they're exercising, needs certainly higher amounts of protein than the World Health Organization recommendation, which is an RDI, which is to make you survive, not necessarily thrive. So a younger female athlete, what sort of amount of protein would we be recommending to them if they're exercising? Somewhere between 2 and 3 grams per kilo body weight. For an older female, whether they're perimenopausal or menopausal, what amount of protein would we be recommending? 2 to 3 grams per kilo body weight. Potentially more than 3 grams, but as a good starting point to keep it simple, 2 to 3 grams per kilo body weight. What would I recommend a young male athlete? 2 to 3 grams per kilo body weight. What would I recommend an older male athlete? 2 to 3 grams per kilo body weight. So again, yes, the science has caught up and says older individuals need more protein because anabolic resistance does occur as we age. Is that amount of protein different from a younger counterpart? No. It just means you actually need the same amount as that younger individual.
Mm. And I think the longevity part of it's important and recovery is important part of nutrition and athletes. And also the type of workout. So if we talk about different zones, so intensity versus zone two, but also hopefully people are lifting weights more and building muscles. So do you have any changes for that with nutrition, fuel in and around your workouts, type of workout?
Yes, certainly. I mean, the duration and the intensity of the session is going to have a direct impact on the amount of carbohydrates before, afterwards, and then during. For lower intensity sessions, again, for simplicity, zone two or below is going to be lower carbohydrate fueling, supplemented with some additional calories from protein and fat. But that lower amount of carbohydrates will generally be recommended at around 30 to 60 grams per hour. So the misconception is in these lower intensity sessions, you don't use carbohydrates. You do. It's just a
Mhm.
preference towards fat, but there is carbohydrates utilized, and it is total calories, again, that it's important there. Duration of that lower intensity session is probably going to have the biggest impact on metabolic adaptation. So, in terms of
Mhm.
improving fat max, it's duration of session in that lower intensity that's probably going to have the biggest impact on the athlete. For higher intensity sessions, certainly we're going higher amounts of carbs. If we look
Mhm.
at weights training, and I'm glad to hear that you are a proponent and a big proponent, it sounds like, of weightlifting.
Yes.
Um, I think, and that's always the difficult position we're in because we're in endurance sports and we see a lot of older individuals, men and women, doing endurance sports. And we know that probably based on the science, that type of training is not optimal for their age and both genders. So including probably at least two quality weight or resistance sessions during season is very important. But I would highlight, I think the off season is that real opportunity for
Mhm.
athletes and endurance athletes to just maybe just drop back a bit on the bike, a bit back on the run, maybe a bit back on the swim. It's going to be all right. You're not going to lose it completely, but really focus maybe 3 times a week, maybe a little bit more volume, drop the weight a little bit. So the actual relative intensity still is there, but you can perform more repetitions in order to try and create some hypertrophy and specific to nutrition around that. As long as they're not, look, most athletes aren't doing German volume training, 10 sets of 10. They're not doing that. They're probably not in the gym for more than 60, 70 minutes. So
Yeah.
in session fueling is generally not recommended. Uh, Going into a resistance-based training session fed is certainly recommended. That
Mm.
could be a simple banana, a piece of toast, something like that. But we at FuelIn always recommend at least a red snack, which we is a lower carbohydrate snack as a minimum. And then certainly what you do after that resistance training is paramount to recovery and adaptation. So there will be carbohydrates, there will be protein, and there will be fat included in that post-workout meal. Whether it's a meal or whether it's a shake, that's probably dependent on timing, and the time of day that the session was completed.
Mm. Yeah, so much good information from that. I think a lot of it, nutrition that people don't focus on. Well, I always say, can out exercise of poor nutrition habits. And we talked to Bob Seebehor, I've worked with a few times, that to move that metabolic efficiency point to the right so you can increase that endurance fat burning metabolic efficiency point, 75% of it, he says, is with nutrition and how you're timing in that nutrition and nutrient density. So it's not just people exercise, those are trying to lose weight or improve their performance and endurance, that they switch to focusing on just the exercise part, but not the nutrition and the timing of the nutrition and quality of food, but also how you're digesting your food. As I talk all about the parasympathetic versus sympathetic, you have to be resting, focused, eating mindfully. So it's how you eat, what, when, where, why. It's so important.
And they fit again. That's I think what we're trying to emphasize here for athletes. It's not one or the other as much
Yeah.
as anything. And I think like you talk about longevity, and there's a lot of talk about longevity at the moment. And I think I was asked the other day, what's the difference? What does someone who's young versus older versus injured need to do and think about longevity? The high performing athlete versus the weekend warrior. And I'm like, well, you eat well, you train well, you sleep well, and then you probably have community. You have friends, you have
Mhm.
family, and if you have those four things in your life and you do them consistently, you do them constantly well, I can guarantee you will live longer, you will live better, and you will live a healthier life. And
Yeah,
it's
it's not
it's
just
there's
live
no
longer.
there's no ice bath there, there's no saunas, there's no NMN supplementation, there's no resveratrol, there's no fasting, there's none of that. Okay, maybe they're the sprinkles. Maybe they do make a difference here or there. The big picture, though, which is so often forgotten by everybody, it's a bit like buying the shiny bike. Oh, the shiny bike's going to make me race really fast. No, it's not. It's the training, it's the nutrition,
Mhm.
it's the sleep and recovery, and probably doing it with a smile on your face that's going to make the difference.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of what I created 10 years ago, the holistic method to train the whole you from the inside out with nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, movement throughout the day, digestion, gut health, hydration. But the best one is happiness, gratitude, play, laughter. Because as a high performer athlete, I was too serious and driven and ambitious and was very competitive, that I realized after my health issues that I was probably a little too extreme. Didn't laugh as much as I should and be silly, and to have a little chill time that you're not just so anal and intense and annoying to be around.
I think it happens as well. If you look at, I'd love to see the stats on the number of individuals who do one 70.3 or one Ironman, because I think it's so intense. And I think I really I enjoy hearing that it's and I've probably been guilty of this. I'm all or nothing generally as an individual. I'm very intense, as you probably guessed, and um, like it is sort of dialing back and going, well, you know what? I'm probably not going to be world champion. I'll give it a red hot shot. I'll give it my
Mhm.
best, but don't get too despondent if you're not winning. As long as you give it your best and you enjoy that process. And
Yes.
coming back to food specifically, like I really am a big proponent, and so is Alan and Megan, of like people falling in love with food again. It's not just about the macros, it's not about the calories, it's about what you're eating and how much vegetables are you eating on a daily basis, and how much fruit are you eating? Are you eating a couple of serves of fruit? Are you eating 6 serves more of vegetables? Are you eating good quality protein? You're not eating you really focus on that enjoyment of food because food can bring so much enjoyment to yourself, but also to those around you. Like, when was the last time you sat down as a family and had a roast chicken or you know, pulled pork, or, you do your vegan meatloaf, whatever it is, but you sat around the table and had a family dinner, or
Mm.
you didn't watch Netflix. You actually sat and talked and ate the food and enjoyed it. And I think that's where I'd love to see more and more of that. And when we get feedback from athletes who send us unsolicited sort of messages and say, I've changed the way I look at food,
Mm.
because it's about, getting enjoyment from it, and that using that as their purpose, and, fueling their purpose with food first and foremost. It definitely makes for a very satisfying role in what we're trying to achieve.
All I keep thinking is people eat dinner while they're watching Netflix.
I think it's a lot more common than you think,
Oh,
with all
I
the
never even
streaming
thought about that.
services.
I guess
Don't
we
do
just
it. Don't
actually
do it.
sit and have a conversation together. Amazing. How old
Yeah, I think
school.
unfortunately it's probably few and far between, Debbie. I think when you look at the state of the health of not just America, I think Australia is in just as dire a situation, and across the world. There definitely has to be something done about
Mm,
nutrition and exercise and every other component of health. And I think the
hmm.
awareness is coming. But again, back
Yeah.
to full circle, I think we're all aware that things need to be done. It's then putting it into practice and actioning it.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for hours because I love these topics, but I know we're up on time and my husband's waiting for our evening walk before I go do the sauna, do my anti-aging routine or improving how I age. Practice what I preach is my goal. But I know you guys have some changes you said coming up in December. So good holiday gift for the new app revision. So we'll look out for those. And people, where do you want to send them to learn more and possibly get started?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate the chat. It probably wasn't what I was expecting, and I'm really glad to be able to just update you and your listeners on Fuel In, and hopefully some of the information provided today around the aging athlete and just how we structure nutrition has been helpful to them. I think first and foremost, visit fuelin.com, review the site, look at all the different parts there around what the app is, what the program is, and then certainly look at the different offers we have in terms of programs and tiers. So if they want to reach out, they can send us a message at coach@fuelin.com, and certainly reference Debbie. If you are doing that, Debbie, I will get you a discount code as well for your
Oh,
listeners,
great.
for give them 20% off their first month. I
Hi.
think that's only fair. So do that, and we will certainly. We're very excited about the launch of the new app in early December, and keep an eye out around Instagram. We're on Instagram as Get Fuel In, and I'll provide the links for you that you can put in the show
Mm-hmm.
notes. And we obviously have Kyle Smith and Imogen Simmons vying for winning the 70.3 World
Oh,
Championships.
yeah.
So
Coming
we'll
up.
be down there. We'll be present in Taupo. So if you see us there,
I
please come and say
wish.
hello.
I wish I was going. I'm not, but I keep hearing about everyone going.
It
So,
should be
all
good fun.
right. Enjoy. Thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate what you guys are doing. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you so much, Debbie.